Well, good morning and welcome to today's live video here on Facebook. My name is Peter Frank and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for Concordia Technology Solutions. We've been doing these videos on about a weekly basis now for a better part of the last 3 months, and it's been a lot of fun to dig deeper into topics. Most of these conversations have been from our blog post, and today is no exception. So today we're going to be talking about harnessing technology so it doesn't harness us. And we've got that fun little graphic that shows the guy in the pulley system. We talk about that a lot, that idea of leveraging technology. So our guest today is Katy Munson. Katy is a DCE serving in the area of communications and connections at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Rockford, Illinois. Katy, thanks for joining us again today.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Great to be here.
I really appreciate this post. It's a great follow-up from what we did a few weeks ago with Bill Johnson, where he discussed evaluating new technology in the church. And you're bringing it a step closer to home today as we talk about evaluating technology in your personal life. Tell me a little bit about that and what kind of was your motivation behind writing this post?
Yeah, so technology is something that we are all impacted by in some form or fashion. And I personally find that I am not always the best at taking a step back and looking at how I'm using technology or how technology is shaping my life and my relationships. So in writing this post, I really kind of zeroed in on concepts of vocation, or those places or stations in life that God has called us to serve. So oftentimes we'll think of vocations as our professional work, but we have this understanding that God calls us to love and serve our neighbors in all areas of life. So that includes our families, our homes, our friendships, relationships across the board. So how does technology impact our vocations? But then also, technology is a resource that we have been given. And so how do we look at that from a resource management perspective or stewardship of a gift that God has given to us?
Excellent.
So those,
well,
yeah.
That's great, and that really goes to answer that question that you put in there. Is this use of technology aiding me or distracting me from filling my God-given vocations? And for our viewers today, I'd really like to encourage you to think about these questions in your own life. And as we'll be asking a few of these, we'll put them on the screen. I'd love to hear from you in terms of what you think, how you would answer that question, and share it with those who are watching. And even if you're watching this after the fact, when it's just recorded, I'd love to hear those comments too. So we'll be asking a number of these, but that question this kind of revolves around is what Katy is talking about with fulfilling God-given vocations. So talk a little bit more about those vocations, Katy. You could even use yourself in your examples of vocations. I know it's far more numerous than you might normally think.
Yeah. So I would say when I look at my family vocations, I am a daughter and a sister. And so when I'm spending time with my family, it can be, and often I will give way to the temptation of using my phone, pulling that out at the dinner table, or maybe being more engaged in some digital conversation than with those in front of me. And that's true for friendships and other relationships as well. And so how, in writing this, I was given the opportunity, or I had the opportunity to step back and kind of look at, is that helpful? Is that tearing down the relationship? I might justify it. Oh, I have to finish this thing for work, or I might be having a conversation with a friend. And those could be, correct uses of technology, but is that the vocation to which I'm called at that point, to be engaged in? So that's one of the primary examples, I guess, that I would have personally. Also, I mentioned a little bit in my blog my vocation as a child of God and nurturing that relationship and growing in God's Word. Am I putting my technology use or engagement at a higher priority than maybe my devotional reading, things like that?
As you start thinking about vocations, I know for me, I often struggle with prioritizing them. Like, I know that if I was explicitly asked, I would say, okay, my priorities are, like you said, child of God, and then husband, and then father, and then marketer fits in there somewhere down the line. Certainly my vocations at church as an elder and on church council and all of that, and not to mention, son and brother and those things you mentioned too. I know that our time doesn't often reflect that in terms of time spent on those vocations, but technology, I think, kind of amplifies that too. When we look at how we use technology, I know for me personally, I always think, how do I use technology in my work? And it flows over into my other vocations many times in a negative way. And so let's start talking about that. Technology in your personal life, and then we'll move in deeper as we get into that kind of stewardship. So, all right, so technology in my life. You've got the question here that we'd like to ask everybody while you're talking about how do you leverage technology for growth rather than distraction. So we'll put that up on the screen in a second, but Katy, why don't you talk about that in your personal life? How do you leverage technology for growth rather than distraction?
A major way that over the past couple of years, I found technology to be a great tool for growth was completing a master's program online. That opportunity was very impactful and helpful in reaching a goal, but also growing in my ability to serve the people that I do in my church work vocation, but also in my family, because that dealt with family life. So that was helpful.
Kind of all tied together there for you.
Yeah, this is a big ball of wax. So that's one major way. Also, just ongoing professional development, reading and following blogs like Concordia Technology Solutions blog, other things dealing with church communications, with education. Those are the major ways that I see that in professional vocations, but at home also, I really appreciate using the Pray Now app for my devotions. That's a digital version of the Treasury of Daily Prayer and has scripture readings outlined along with other readings from historical church fathers, things like that, and a hymn and prayers for the day. So those are just a couple of examples of how I found technology helpful for growth.
Sure, and talk about your master's a little bit, because I know there's no Concordia University in Rockford there. You did this all long distance, right?
Correct, yes. I was part of one of the cohorts through Concordia University in Seward, Nebraska in their Family Life program. And it was completely online, 12 8-week courses. And so there was connection to my classmates, the others in my cohort, through discussion boards, and also with professors who are really excelling in their fields, so that this technology allowed us to connect with and learn from these practitioners who are just really fulfilling their vocations well and helping to equip us in ours.
Good, and then going back to what you're talking about with like the Pray Now app, technology is often a way to remind us to do things that we might often forget. It's easy for me to pick up my phone and check my messages, check texts and that, but it can also remind me to draw back into God's Word. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there too, is that having that accessibility not only allows you to study for your master's, but allows you to study God's Word and dig deeper. Do you find that it's when you're doing those things that you get distracted by other technology, or are you able to focus on the task at hand?
Depends on the day. Some days I feel like, well, I'm really rocking this focus thing. And then other days it's just scattered abroad. One of the things actually in my master's, when we were taking a resource management class, we really looked at the concept of continuous partial attention and how, by and large, as a culture, we do not focus on one particular thing at a time and are therefore actually not as productive. We like to think about multitasking as this superpower, but there's a lot of research that would argue it's a myth. And it's one that I still buy into, but even having that information. So that's, that finding ways to focus and to limit those distractions. One of the things that I do is the only thing on my phone that I receive notifications for are phone calls and text messages. Okay. So my email, I will check that periodically, but I do not receive the notifications on the phone.
That was something that I did a while ago, is to turn off the sound notifications, or like I used to have it vibrate when a new email came across. And I started getting these like phantom vibrations in my leg thinking that I had emails. So I finally just turned off all vibrations. And then recently I even turned off even the notifications that pop up, so that visually whenever I open my phone I wasn't distracted by them. And it's been great. But I want to touch back on something that you mentioned, that resource management, and tying that idea to stewardship. Often we think of stewardship as the offerings that we give, our tithing. Explain how resource management in this way in technology is a form of stewardship. I really like that concept.
Well, when we look at technology as something that God has given to us, or that God allows us to use in our work, in our vocations, then it goes back to that prioritization that you were mentioning before as well. So we have a finite amount of resources, even though sometimes it seems like they're unlimited. And that includes our time, our technology, our relationships are, that sounds a little too technical. I'm not super comfortable using that word, but the way we prioritize and manage sometimes diminishes the value of our relationships, at least in my life. They're how I communicate that value. And so this idea of resource management and technology, how are we spending our time with technology, with people? How are we allowing it to manage us, whether we realize it or not?
Yeah, you don't want this to be the thing that dictates your day. You want it to be there. I was off screen there. You don't want your phone to dictate your day, but you do want to use it to help figure out what you're doing in the day and manage your day. But it's that tension. That's why I like the word that we chose for the blog post title of harness, like harnessing, being able to leverage, but also harness as a burden. And technology can often be that. Let's move over into the next topic, technology in my relationships, and how that affects you. You've talked about that a little bit, but let's dig into that a little bit deeper. So can you talk first off of the benefits of technology in relationships, and then maybe dig into some of the problems that it could cause?
Absolutely. I think benefits are pretty prevalent in our discussion on technology. This very video chat is, I think, a benefit. We are able to connect with our family and friends who might not live close to us and maintain those relationships, provide encouragement, share prayer requests, different things, just kind of do life together in a technological way. So I think that's one of the greatest benefits in terms of maintaining long distance relationships. Just a couple of examples. When my brother was studying abroad, we were able to FaceTime at Thanksgiving, and that was a huge blessing. Friends going to school in Nebraska with people who were from all across the country, and being a church worker, many of my classmates and friends are scattered. And so technology allows us to share joys and burdens and resources, ideas, all that jazz. And it's just, there's a lot of benefits that I think we really is often where we put our focus when we discuss technology.
Sure, and I know that at least for what we do here at CTS and what I've been able to do, you mentioned Facebook groups before, like the Lutheran Communicators Facebook group.
Yes.
That's how you and I started connecting, and as well as many other people. And again, we're all across the U.S. Without that blessing, we wouldn't have, without that technology as a blessing, we wouldn't have been able to connect in that way. So that's great. But now going to the downsides of that. How can technology kind of isolate us in relationships? And we'll have a couple questions related to that in a second, but let's start with that side of things.
Yeah. So we, as you you showed before, we all kind of have our pocket computers that and screens that we can. I'm at a loss. I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but we get to choose exactly what we're seeing, and it's very individualized. It can kind of it turns us in on ourselves, or is another way that that we're just able to be selfish almost, and so we can also we just are isolated in that. Not to mention when we're isolated in our technology use, accountability diminishes, which can be troublesome in parents monitoring their children, and what they're seeing, what's going into their minds as they're developing, and if that's helpful and godly and nourishing, or if that's a distraction from that.
Well, I think about when I was a kid, it was kind of the everyday thing, especially during the summer, that we would have friends over and play in our backyard or play in their backyard. And usually there's a mom at home who was cooking dinner. And I know, at least in my childhood, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, our neighbors were. So we had that connection and we were always there. But now, I mean, the stereotypical kid is heads down in their phone, texting people who may just be a few doors down or a few blocks away. And it does create that isolation. There may be some personal interaction, but it's blocking out everything else around it. And you, when we talked the other day, you had some good examples of you at home isolating yourself in technology. Can you get into that a little bit more?
Yes. So it's funny, or I found it to be funny, ironic sometimes, when I will be talking to somebody on the phone. It's kind of scary how easy it is for me to become distracted, even when I am seemingly focused on that task, or not task, but that relationship, that conversation, and that it's so simple to, I'm going to look something up, pertinent to our conversation, but then to be pulled into scrolling through Facebook or Instagram, something like that, or there's an email there, I can just quickly respond to that, and no harm, no foul. But that's taking focus away from that conversation, that relationship, and the engagement there, and kind of that's that selfishness again.
Yeah, I experienced that same thing. I used to travel quite a bit for my work, and so this was before kids, but my wife and I would have a conversation every night over the phone. And it was very easy for both of us to fall into doing our work. She's a teacher, she was grading papers, and so it's things that we did at home when we were in person, where we'd kind of work side by side and have that conversation. But when we were, apart and having that conversation, we'd end up being so focused we'd stop talking for a few minutes, even though we were still connected on the phone. It's just this weird thing that technology brought into it, where it kind of brought us closer together, but it brought us easily apart too. Let's go into this next idea, and we've got a question here to pose to the audience as well. But I'd love to hear what you think as well. How do you disconnect digitally in your daily or weekly rhythm? What kind of actions do you take that allow you to kind of put technology to the side to kind of prevent that isolation and bring you back into other relationships?
Yes. Well, one of the, I guess, bigger things in a weekly rhythm is I try to be pretty disconnected from technology on my days off or my day off. Um, there will be times, that I use that to talk with family and friends far away, but by and large, I try to limit that technology use at those points. Also, not looking at email and such in certain hours, just when it's evening or when it's early in the morning, and it's that time for devotion or for reading a hardcover book or a physical copy of a book. That would be the most common times. Also, I try to limit and put my phone on silent if we're having, if I'm having a meal with someone. Keep that in a bag or in a pocket where I'm not going to see a notification or hear one. Again, that's the goal. It's not always the practice.
Sure. I know for me, going back to what we talked about before, those notification things, if I receive some kind of notification that draws my attention back to my phone, I'll definitely fall into that temptation to check it. But when I don't have those notifications, or if I leave my phone in my bedroom while it's charging, I don't really think about it. Like it's not that I'm desiring to go back there. It's not that I really miss it. It's just when it dings or buzzes or whatever, that's when I have that need to go there. It's kind of like that fear of missing out, that FOMO they talk about. Like that's what it seems to me that, okay, this wasn't important a second ago, but now that I hear that noise, now I need to go and check it. I think what you said there too, leaving it away from you is a key thing. And I'd love to hear from our audience, how do you disconnect digitally? We had a post a while back about, I think Daniel Ross wrote it, about disconnecting during Lent. And I've thought about that for myself. Do I give up social media for Lent? And it's such a part of my work that I never make that commitment in my personal life. But I don't know, any other tips that you would suggest for people on how to disconnect digitally, just to draw your focus back into your vocations?
Yeah. So this was a tip that I had never considered prior to this, or I didn't even know it was a possibility prior to researching for this blog. And I don't think I ended up including it, but we've probably all come across different research and articles, posts about screen addiction, and very real thing that is. But one of the things that somebody out in the blogosphere recommended was changing your screen to black and white, and that the colors of notifications and everything have a way of pulling us in a way that black and white images don't. And so that was something that I thought was really cool. And if that's more of a struggle or a challenge for you, that's one avenue. Also, just limiting notifications, like we've already discussed. And I like the idea of when it comes to like family time, or maybe as a family you discuss, when is technology use okay, and when are we going to say that those of us in this space and place are going to be our focus. And some families have like their cell phone basket or a charging station, like all of the devices are placed right here, and that's where they stay for that designated period of time.
I've heard of this. I haven't experienced it myself, but when friends go out for dinner or something, I've heard this idea of you put your cell phones in a stack, and whoever reaches for theirs first has to pay for the meal. Like,
nice.
I don't know if I can afford paying for everybody. That idea of just saying, okay, we're going to focus on this right now because this is a better way to interact than making our phones available for us. So
that builds accountability.
Absolutely. And again, it's not accountability leveraging technology. It's disconnecting from it. So that leads to kind of our last question for our audience that I'd love to hear your answer for. Where is there a place for digital technology, and when is the old-fashioned form or approach a better route? and specifically within relationships. You talked about how long distance technology is great to connect. Where do you see that being a failure in relationships, or having too many negatives to use when an old-fashioned non-digital approach is a better way to go? And for you, Katy, and also for those who are watching, go ahead and drop a note in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say too. But Katy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that this is one of those questions that I don't know that I'll ever have a firm answer on because it's one that can be applied to situations. It's more of one of those get you thinking kind of things, like what am I sacrificing in going the digital way, and what am I gaining? How is that going to balance out or remain in tension is probably a better way of saying it than balancing out. One of the things that I guess I would consider with this is distance. Is this is it a possibility to meet up for coffee rather than FaceTiming? Is it a possibility to even, we're still using digital technology here, but is it possible to have a conversation on the phone rather than texting or emailing back and forth? Just different ways to get more of a human connection there with voice and tone and everything like that. But if it's a case of, I would really like to encourage my friend, who's hundreds of miles away. Is it going to be better for me to send her a text message than not say anything at all? I would say yes, it is. So, but maybe we want to mail a card. Maybe that's always an option, right? Keep the postal service in business, and different things like that. Yeah, I don't know that I really fully answered that, but I think it's one of those that's really to guide thinking and not just automatically say, oh, this is the way that we do this.
Yeah. I've learned quite a bit in my time as an elder at church that it's all about, ultimately it's what benefits that relationship most. And for me, I can only control how I interact with people. And so I think about the recipient's end. And we talked about that last week when I had Don Antorin and how he uses technology in his youth ministry, like Snapchat and Instagram and texting. That's where those youth are. But I know that I can't go and send a text to everybody who's in my elder district because many of them don't have cell phones. And even a phone call doesn't always work. It's that personal visit. And that's really helped me focus. Again, we talk about this a lot, focusing on the audience and what their preference for communication is and lead ourselves in that direction. And so I think like you said, if you've got that opportunity to go get coffee with somebody, if that's going to benefit the relationship more, that's the way to go. And it's hard to figure those things out, and it's a trial and error thing. Like you said, I don't know if we can ever answer this question fully, but I think what you've shown us today is some great ideas and things to keep in mind on how we can move in that right direction. So I'd love to hear from others who are watching this. Sherry posted a couple things. She's said she's connected with many cousins and friends from back in the day through Facebook. It's been a great experience. I know I've experienced that too with family members or friends from college who I haven't seen in years, but being able to connect online has been great. And then she also said here, and I think this is going to what you were saying, hearing a friend's voice is sometimes better than texting too. And again, it just goes back to that, what builds that relationship. So, Katy, any final thoughts before we do a few plugs for your blog and a book that you reference? Anything that we haven't touched on yet?
I think just continuing encouragement to recognize the great gift and resource that technology is, but also to take a step back and look at how this impacts our relationships, our vocations, and most of all, our relationship with Jesus and those that we're called to care for and serve in His love.
Very good. Well, there is the blog post we've been referencing, Harnessing Technology So It Doesn't Harness Us. And I'll go ahead and share that link in the chat here. And then, Katy, you also referenced a book, and we at CPH really appreciate the plug. And by no means did we ask you to do this, but I know that this book, Digitized, was a big influence in your research. Can you talk a little bit about that before we finish up for the day?
Certainly. Well, thank you, CPH, for providing this resource, is what I have to say. I just really appreciate how Dr. Bull uses, I guess, I don't know, I might be stealing some of his words here or somebody else's that I read, but a thinking approach to using technology that let's look at how we're using it. A lot of this, just reiterating what we've been saying, it's a very comprehensive guide through that idea, and much more thoroughly researched than my post. And I think that it could be really helpful for any leadership boards at church, maybe for husbands and wives to go through or to read through with your teenagers, things like that. There's also an article of his, which I think draws on the same research and work in I believe it's the January edition of the Lutheran Witness. That could be a nice entry point as well.
Excellent.
Just
good
resources to converse about.
Absolutely, and this is just going to continue to be an ongoing conversation because technology changes so much, and our dependencies on technology just seems to continue to grow. But understanding its rightful place and how we use it in each of our vocations is a learning process that it's only going to take time to get better and better at. So, Katy, thank you again for joining me today.
Yeah, when we have that framework.
Exactly. Thanks again. I really appreciate it. And thank you to those of you who tuned in. I always enjoy having people watching and hope that you find this useful. We love to hear your comments. So go ahead and put those into the chat. But I think that's it for today. So thanks again, Katy, and have a great rest of the day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Peter.